I hope that was a semi-reasonable setup for you guys. I know it's a little far out there, and we'll try to balance the kind of hardcore here and now and the value that you're producing today. But I'll also try to challenge you just to look at, and try to tease out your thoughts about where you think the world is going to be and what that means for your businesses 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 years from now. And so let's start with some preliminaries. And if we can just go down the line and each of you take 30 seconds to introduce yourself and your company, but then give yourself another minute to talk about some accomplishment or some customer kind of value that you delivered that you're especially proud of that would also give the audience a chance to understand where you're coming from. So, Alex?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the intro and for the awesome talk to prompt it. Foundation model, pun intended. And I'm Alex. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Snorkel. I'm also on faculty at the University of Washington, which I think I have represented also in my swag. On the Snorkel side, what we build is a data-centric AI development platform. So we've been working for about 7.5 years, first at Stanford, now at Snorkel, on this idea that a lot of the bottlenecks, at least in the, say, the old state of machine learning, were increasingly data-centric around labeling and developing and managing the training data that models fit to, at least in supervised learning, rather than finding the right model. It's not really an either-or, but in terms of where do you get the biggest leverage. And so I can jump actually right to a customer example. We started, one of our first customers was a top 3 US bank, and they were trying to do something at the time around a LIBOR rate transition. I don't know the details. It's as foreign as protein folding to me. But they were trying to use machine learning to pull stuff out and classify stuff around these large multi-100-page, very bespoke contracts for a very C-suite visibility critical kind of application. And they had all originally they thought, okay, we'll need really specialized fancy machine learning models from this, for this. We'll need all of our best data scientists on it. And then they, surprisingly to them, unsurprising to us, found out that really it was data that was the blocker. They used a generic open source transformer model. It took them about a day, but they needed ultimately to go through about 2 quarters of labeling, asking their subject matter experts in the line of business to digitally annotate all this huge corpus of data. So this is something that we've seen many folks run into, and we try to make that faster by making that labeling process more programmatic and more of an iterative development process. I'll also maybe share some more recent customer examples that integrate foundation models into that, and I can give a little bit of our academic and commercial perspective there on maybe where that the midterm state of the timeline, how they fit in with that enterprise reality. But I'll pause there for now.
Fantastic. And I think we'll also want to get back to you on both the technological but also maybe social or human barriers in that whole process, because I'm sure there are both technology and I guess I would categorize them as social problems that you had to overcome.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the first projects that funded us back at Stanford was this wonderful DARPA project, DARPA Simplex, all about bringing this subject matter expert into the loop. And a lot of what we did was inspired by that idea that, single biggest predictor of whether data science projects are going to, I think, succeed or fail in any organization. How siloed are the subject matter expert and data science teams? The people who know how to label the data and assess the output and actually use it, and the people who are building the models. And I think that's there's a whole bunch of interesting factors that are even more interesting when you bring data-centric and foundation model aspects into it. So
fantastic. Yeah. Anu, Stasig, tell us a little bit about you, Stasig, and then just like Alex did, some good examples.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm Anu. I head product at Stasig. We help customers and teams accelerate their product development velocity through experimentation and observability. For example, we help customers turn every feature gate into an A/B test, which means that you not only have control over how you launch and release your features, but you also see how each feature is impacting your end user experience. And this second part, in fact, is where the gold lies, in fact, because a lot of the learning happens in the second phase when you see your users responding to your features. Rec Room is one of Madrona's portfolio companies, is a virtual reality and gaming platform. And their head of data, when they came to us, his name is Joel, he came to us about this time last year and told us about how difficult it is for him to learn which features are hurting or helping their gamers. And that lack of visibility itself is painful because they don't know what to develop and which features to develop next. It's amazing because a year down the line, his sentiment has flipped, but really in a way that he didn't quite expect. So they started to launch a new app design, which included a whole revamp of the player profile. And as they launched this with the feature gate on Stasig, they realized and saw their metrics plummet. This is surprising because they weren't expecting anything to change. It was just a redesign. And so when they looked at their feature gate impact, they realized that when players are interacting in their profile, that's where they start sessions and chat sessions with other players. That's where they discover other players. And their chat interactions had dropped by 25%. So what's going on in this player profile? First of all, it was stumping because they didn't realize it or expect it. But when they started to hypothesize what's going on, they realized that maybe this message button is hidden in some header bar. And that is causing customers to miss this and their users to miss this entirely. So they brought down and made that message button a lot more obvious. The metrics kind of revived partially, but didn't get back to baseline. So this still remains a mystery for them. It remained a mystery for them a couple of weeks as into this experiment. And finally, when they realized that, in fact, customers are completely missing their header bar, they brought down that whole message button down into front and center so that their users and gamers know exactly this is the first action or the primary action to take on this profile page. So in kind of a circuitous way, the team realized and discovered new product innovations in a journey that they weren't expecting to. They were just rolling out a new app design. And in fact, I want to close by saying that this is, in fact, a traditional sequence of iterating through a feature. But Stasig also helps you upfront select or build a couple of variants or more variants and automatically detect which is the winning variant. We can find which variant is performing the best with your users and automatically direct traffic to that variant based on a certain metric that you prefer and want to optimize for. So that's kind of where we're going, but we can come back to some of the challenges and sociological impact.
Right. I love the example because, and this will be another theme maybe we can get back to as a group. One of the beautiful things about that example is it shows that you're able to precisely quantify the value that you're delivering to customers. And you would normally think at this layer that your companies are all operating at, that could be challenging. And so that's a question that I'd like to get back to. But let's give Justin now a chance to talk about himself and company and an example.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. Not the candy company that was probably very popular a couple days ago for many of you around Halloween. But we actually offer data analytics on data anywhere. And really what makes us unique, we're kind of like a database without storage. We think of all other storage as though it's our own. So data can live in a data lake. That's really where the technology was originally born at Facebook 10 years ago. It was called Presto, later became known as Trino. It's an open source project my co-founders created. So data lake analytics are certainly a category of use case, but what makes our technology particularly unique is we can access data anywhere. So you could have data in MongoDB or MySQL or Postgres or Snowflake or Redshift or Hadoop or S3, and being able to essentially do data warehousing analytics without the need to consolidate your data into one central data warehouse. And that's sort of our big idea. And a good customer example that I like to use to illustrate this is actually Comcast. We all probably watch TV to some capacity. They store all the TV shows that you watch. Basically, every time you hit the remote control, that gets logged as an event in a data lake. So they have your entire viewing history essentially in a data lake. But separately, in a traditional data warehouse, they have the billing data, how much you spend every month, how long you've been a customer, and that's data they've had forever, essentially. And they wanted to actually correlate the shows that you watch with how much you spend and do cross-sell and upsell campaigns based on the shows that you watch. You know, if you like Game of Thrones, maybe you would like a Showtime package. And that really needed access to both data sets, which lived in wildly different data sources and actually even managed by different teams. And so with Starburst, you can just connect to these data sources and start running queries. You don't necessarily have to move the data. You don't necessarily have to go through traditional ETL processes. You can just query the data and start to do those analytics. And since then, they've actually also started to move to the cloud and start to move to other technologies, and they can leverage us as sort of this SQL abstraction layer above their data sources. So their end users, their analysts, don't need to know that the table today is in the data warehouse, tomorrow it's in a data lake, next day it's in S3. It's all kind of hidden from them. So that's essentially what we do.
Fantastic. By the way, for the organizers, just a warning, I don't have a watch, I don't have a phone on me, and I don't see a clock anywhere. And so if someone can kind of rudely give me a, say, 10-minute warning, just in case. And I don't have good enough eyes either, I see. I see that someone's trying to communicate that. All right, so I think we're okay. That said more than 10, right?
There's a sign that says something.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, good. So let's get then back to this first question that I want to get at, and I think it's pertinent to all three of you, which is, and it really got teased out even or hinted at in all of your examples, which are really impressive, but it couldn't have been easy in any of those cases. There must have been kind of points that you found particularly high risk or difficulty for some combination of kind of technology risks or some business or internal politics or social risks and so on. So I think hearing about that maybe can give a sense for just the kind of well-roundedness of what you have to do when you're servicing your customers. So Alex, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I can even start back when our customers were users, and it was paying in free burritos on the academic side. Actually, it comes to also a theme of, I think, data integration, a different kind of integrating rather than different physical locations of data, but different locations within different personas. So again, back to this theme of the data scientist has one type of information and skill set, but then the subject matter expert, either codified or in their heads, the clinician, the underwriter, the line of business analyst, the government SME, the network technician, they have this information that you need to teach the models, and how do you kind of join those two together. And I think with the prompt you gave was around kind of challenges or those
yes.
kind of I think anything in academia, anything as a PhD student, probably too highfalutin to call it politics, but the friction, let's say, was definitely around if this was to start with, back when we started around 2015, if the data and thinking about these kinds of things was even part of the purview of machine learning study.
Right.
I remember being told, this is, you're supposed to be doing machine learning, right? You should, you're not going to get published around, cleaning up messy data. That's janitor work. That's exogenous to what we do in machine learning. And I think of that as kind of what we often now, we started to call the model-centric world, or the kind of Kaggle ImageNet era, where machine learning, your machine learning, your AI journey started when you downloaded the data set that had all the nice labels, and then you tried to fit the model to that labels, just to those labels, right? So that was kind of friction point number one, is just opening that up and saying, no, actually, how you label and manage the data, how you bring people in to curate it, that's actually not just something that should be in our purview. It should be one over the first-class citizen in the process, because as models converge and get more automated, that's actually the biggest leverage point. Whether you use we did a study with Stanford Radiology Department. I spent 8 to 14 person months labeling chest X-rays and other modalities for triage use case. They took a day to build the model. Again, similar theme. The difference in the first best model on the leaderboard and the 20th best was a point of ROC accuracy. The difference between a week and it was 10, 100x based on data labeling. We were able to shrink that to about 8 hours with this programmatic approach, but the theme was people didn't even think about messing with the data as something that AI people should be thinking of.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I relate to, because I can't count the number of times we've engaged in some customer problem out of Microsoft Research, and then researchers lose heart when they discover a lot of that groundwork. It's really important.
And we see it in, sorry, go ahead.
But I wanted to get to Anu, because I think one thing I was wondering in hearing your example is, sometimes you, in the customer organization, in your case, the product designers might feel threatened by what you're doing. Does that happen, and
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what we often see is that there is a different set of people who roll out features and the engineering operations of that. There's yet another set of people who do analytics and product analytics and reflect back on what happened and try to correlate it with the features that they shipped. And of course, there's designers who have skin in the game as to, is this design going to work or not? And they have an opinion about whether it's going to work. What we do is bring data, and in fact, we find that the data people, the data teams are the bridges between these groups of people and make sure that they all see the same thing and arrive at the same conclusion. And that is what we are helping customers do, is to put on a data science lens or a data lens and arrive at literally the same conclusion that your data scientist would have done for you, but in a self-empowered way.
Yeah.
And that is, I feel, the power that we bring in terms of when everybody has the same data, we expect them to reach the same conclusion.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So Justin, I was listening to your example with Comcast, by the way, and I have not cut the cord yet, so just so you know. I was thinking of a struggle I'm having right now in a similar situation where we're trying to extract and aggregate data across multiple parts of a large pharmaceutical company. And there are lots of technical challenges. I'd like to hear from you about that with the Comcast example. But also, there was a lack of cooperation and buy-in by some of the organizations that were sort of guarding their data silos. So can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of something an engineering leader told me 10 years ago, earlier in my career, that there are no technical problems, only people problems. And that has always stuck with me, especially scaling a company. I think of that a lot. And that's certainly true as well in the example that you gave. So, one of the kind of patterns or strategies that our technology enables is something that people will call a data mesh, basically an approach to decentralized data. And I think people who want to deploy a data mesh struggle with the people and process side more so than the technology side, only because you're now basically democratizing your participation in the creation of data products. And that goes to almost something very philosophical that I think we all struggle with in a lot of different areas, which is like how democratic to be. And there are pros and cons to both, right? You want to keep everybody aligned and towards a certain mission, but democracy and democratic principles, open up a lot of efficiencies. They remove you as a bottleneck if you're a central authority. And so these are things that I watch customers wrestle with, and they have different approaches. Some of them choose to be very democratic and let the data producers themselves create data products to be consumed by others, and you end up with a lot of different data products. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but you end up with a lot, as opposed to taking more of a central control where you have a strong central authority that is basically saying these are the gold standard data products. These are the only ones you can consume because we've certified that these are good. And so there are pros and cons with both approaches, but certainly something that we see people wrestle with. And I think also with any new approach, you end up with some fear of change and fear of doing something different as well.
Great. I have a bunch more questions, but if there are questions from the audience, can you somehow just let me know and I'll interrupt myself to let you do that. Don't feel pressure though, because I've got plenty of my own. So maybe just to follow up on that, Justin, and I was kind of remarking about this at the outset with Anu's opening remarks. How do you demonstrate value? Or maybe it's some combination of value and taking credit for getting something good to happen, meeting someone's goal, in your customer organization. So how do you think about that? Are you able to quantify the value that you provide? What are you contractually obligating yourself to show?
Well, yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's a core element of our sales process itself. Like, we very much believe in this command of the message concept. For those of you who've been through various types of sales training, like we want to be able to quantify the value that we're providing and ensure that it is real value and we're not wasting our time on science projects. And I think that is a challenge with the technology of ours, because there are always people that think what we're doing is cool and want to try it out.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a real tangible business problem, then you end up sort of wasting everybody's time. So we really try to push our salespeople specifically to do that qualification and ensure that we're really attached to a business value, use case. It's also something that we work with our prospects on to say, hey, look, this is like in both of ours best interest to attach to real value that we can actually quantify. It's going to make you look better as well. You can show your boss what you've done. So generally that's narrowing the world. Even though we can be the single point of access to all the data that you have, that's like the vision, that's the end state. We start with something much smaller. It might be, okay, you have this cross-sell campaign to do, and you've got viewing behavior in Teradata in Hadoop, and you've got billing data in Teradata. And let's just prove that we can run this cross-sell campaign much faster and much more effectively than any other approach. From there, we can go and expand and do other use cases. And so it's very much like a land and expand approach, working hand in hand with our champions on the customer side.
Yeah. Anu, am I being naive in saying that whole range of issues is much easier for you and your business, or is it also complicated for you?
It is very quantifiable.
Yeah.
People and our customers in principle love the concept of experimentation and bringing the scientific methods to product development. But we all realize that it's at least historically, experimentation has slowed down product development, and people think of it that way, and we want to address that, and we quantify and show it in a graph in the product, how well you're doing, and how we can help you accelerate your velocity. And so it is part and built into the product that customers see every day, their executives see every day, but also it starts to reflect in their business and product metrics, which is also built into the product. So it's a one-stop way for us to quantify what value we bring.
Right.
And just to tack on to, I also got dragged through command of the message recently too, or I guess dragged, I was complicit in it. But I think it's an interesting point for data science, especially the area we work in. It's both eminently quantifiable. There's always an accuracy score, and you can show that we're going to get higher scores faster and something like that, and we'll do it through data-centric or whatever. But then there's, it's deceiving because there's often a big gulf to business value. That's been something that we've had to work hard on. It is something that now we're trying to bake in both through process and very strict gating into the pre-sales process of actually saying, we moved from kind of a single track of let's run a kind of technical experiment with success criteria that are technical around accuracy, time to value, et cetera, to a dual track motion where we don't move on to the technical evaluation until we also have a parallel track business evaluation and a bridge between the two, saying if this model scores goes up 5 points in this evaluation, then presenting to the economic buyer, the line of business, do you care? And what does it mean for you? How does that connect to your metrics? So it puts more weight on the upfront process. Yeah. It adds more bulk, but we found it, to be very successful. And the interesting thing is, in part because, and I wonder if you find this with your kind of analytics users, for our kind of data science teams, because they're behind at this, they're actually very collaborative. Right? You'd say, oh, they might get adversarial because we're kind of pitching the case for higher value of our product offering, but this is the case they're trying to make internally as well. And so they actually are very collaborative often in this process. So that's one positive of the kind of nascent state that things are in.
Right. I think we have time. Okay, so good. I'm going to keep going here. And so this is great. And thank you for coming up close for my eyesight. So maybe let's shift away from the business and the social aspect and get a little more technical. This is partly maybe a two-part question. What are you detecting, not just from the computer science, but also in the evolution of what your customers seem to want to do? Do you think that the stack is going to change? Is there going to be a new abstraction layer? What's happening? What is the tech stack going to look like? Anu, let's start with you.
Sure. One of the trends that we continue to see and customers continue to push us in the direction of is more real time. And real time is more actionable. Real time data is more actionable, and customers, as they launch new features, want to be able to react immediately if a metric is tanking or customer experience is impacted, and they want to roll it back as soon as they see that. So a lot of the diagnostics as well as observability is becoming more real time. The stack for that needs to be more streaming rather than more batch-based, but a lot of that streaming infrastructure remains complicated to operate. It remains hard to diagnose and debug, which means that our customers see that, and they are not able to reconcile between different systems from which their data is flowing in. So there is, of course, a lot of room for improvement in terms of real-timeness of that data, but also our ability to surface the right data rather than the noise that a lot of real-time systems start to surface in front and put in front of customers. So we want to be able to make sure that we surface signal rather than noise. I'll pass on the baton and we can come back to the next.
Well, wait, before moving on though, so if the next layer up is not a traditional deep learning or a neural transformer, but is or some BaseNet or something, but is some reinforcement learning thing in order to support kind of more dynamic decision making. Does that change fundamentally the architecture or the technology of what you're doing?
We have yet to figure out the model that works across a lot of our customers. So we have generic multi-arm bandit models. We have an ability to customize these models for specific customers. And we are, of course, looking at foundational models to develop more of these abilities more downstream in sort of. There is an aspect of incorporating contextual information as part of this delivery, because as in the customer's context, one customer's context differs widely. For example, Rec Room's context differs widely from, say, SnackPass. And that contextual information, I think, needs to be baked in, not just in the model, but in how we surface, which signal do we surface versus not.
But how deep does that go? Does that really mean you have two completely separate, just in the hardcore code that you're offering and deploying for the customer, is it, how different is it?
Yes, we try to keep a unified platform, except where we can configure different aspects of the context. So we are trying to separate out the contextual information into what could be a configurable aspect, which of course, in fact, customers also want to control to some extent.
Okay. So Justin, I imagine in your case, there's hopefully a little more modularity there.
Yes.
Is that true or not?
That is right.
Modularity?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think we're trying to provide, essentially optionality for our customers where they get the freedom to decide where that data lives, where it lives today, where it lives tomorrow, and be able to incorporate, that data into their analysis without necessarily having to run it through traditional ETL pipelines. So I think, like to your original question of sort of how does the data stack change or evolve, we think that the nature of ETL will change over time. For 40 years, it's been the same. It's extract, transform, load. Today, people will talk about extract, load, and then transform within a database. We think the E and the L just don't matter, the extract and the load. And it's really all about the T. The T is the only part that adds real business value anyways. It's preparing your data for analysis, which is ultimately the business value. And so, we see a world where people kind of accept that data is going to come from a variety of data sources, that's not slowing down, that's actually only going to increase over time. And certainly that's what history has shown us. I'll tell you a quick story. Teradata acquired my first startup back in 2014. And Teradata was the pioneer in the data warehousing model. I mean, they were the canonical enterprise data warehouse. And what was surprising to me when I got there was that not a single one of their customers actually had all of their enterprise data in Teradata. So even they couldn't achieve this vision in a much simpler time and place than it is today. Now you've got a whole host of additional data sources. So I think this notion of accepting that data will live in a variety of places, and how do we take more of an analytics-centric approach rather than a storage-centric approach and moving data around is a big idea that I think is here to stay.
One thing that seems to be happening, and maybe Justin and then Alex, these large foundation models seem to be getting closer and closer to being more practical and universal data translators. And so does that affect your thought process around your tech stack?
How do you mean exactly?
So if you think about, in the kind of healthcare example with that unstructured medical note, Microsoft has poured in, as well as Google and Amazon, a lot of engineering effort to be able to take those kinds of unstructured medical notes and convert HL7 FHIR standards. But if a foundation model doesn't care if it's FHIR or that raw unstructured note, then does that part of the tech stack actually matter anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, I think it probably matters less and less over time. Yeah.
Alex, and so what we want to try to understand is, for your slices of that tech stack, how is that evolving, and what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, lots of thoughts on foundation models. And I like the foundation model versus large language model term. Partly it's out of Loda, my co-founder, but at Stanford with that center, I know it's a little bit of a terminological war, but I think it is exactly relevant to, I'm sure it's not by accident, this conversation about the stack, because I think they are going to be the foundation for almost all model development moving into the future. And we're seeing this in our customers. Maybe I'll zoom into one area where I think might be interesting. Maybe there's even a little disagreement. But in the enterprises we work with, so we work with large top 10 U.S. banks and government agencies and healthcare settings, et cetera. I think there's going to be, at least for a long while, a split between what you do during training and development and then what you actually do in production, especially for targeted tasks. So let's say you're trying to, one public example we have is supporting one of our customers, Genentech, and pulling stuff out of clinical trial documents. And this is very, very messy, long tail. We're actually using foundation models like Layet LM from Microsoft, and we're doing a collaboration with Azure AI on this. But there's kind of two interesting challenges. Number one is that as amazing as they are, they don't work out of the box on these very challenging kind of high performance SLA problems where you need to pull something out of a very complex bespoke data set at very high accuracy. A clinical trial information, a patient record, a customer call complaint in a regulated setting. Number two, enterprises have a lot of challenges we've been seeing, and I'm thinking a lot about FinServ, but others as well, of actually deploying these foundation models in production.
Yep.
We had a dinner with one of our banking customers in Charlotte recently, and one of the data science leads there likened it to a Don Quixote activity that he was trying to get GPT-3 through model risk management. He said maybe in a couple of years, but it's the process that counts, not the end, which I don't think I'll get to. That's what he said. So this is the challenge that we've seen: is how do you have all this excitement, and there's clearly amazing information encoded in these foundation models, including cross-modal and cross-format, to your point, which is amazing. But it's a challenge to get it to production, not for these creative kind of generative activities where you're copywriting or making images, but where you want to do, you want to automate a task at high accuracy in a regulated environment, let's say, on a very fine-tuned task. So one way that we're doing at a high level, and we have some academic papers out, and putting out some more soon too from the company side, but we're letting customers use the foundation models to help train more specialist models that exist on the current MLOps stack. So you can train a model that's 10,000 times smaller than GPT-3 and actually more accurate on a target task.
Yep.
But you train it through all these large language model-based strategies and others. You can dump in your labels, dump in your heuristics, and use foundation models. You train it in a data-centric way, but then the deployment artifact is you're kind of going from generalist to specialist.
Yep.
And this is at least something that I think in the next couple of years we're going to see. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I think we're going to see it a lot because there's undeniable benefits, but you don't need to, and you often can't, actually run fine-tuned GPT-3s in production.
Right.
Anyway, I'll leave off there, but that's one technical perspective. It also has to do with the evolving stack and some of these social, social, regulatory, et cetera factors.
So maybe you're giving me an excuse to ask a more selfish question pertaining to Microsoft, but I think it would pertain to the other hyperscalers also. And I think we just have a few minutes left, so but I think this will end up being our last question. What do you need from the hyperscalers? What do you need? And you don't have to make it specifically about Azure, but from any of them. And so let's start with you, and let's go down the line.
Well, I was going to say free GPT-4 credits. For all of our, But you know, I think at least in the AI space, there's a, again, I'm speaking my book here, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for partnership because there's this, you know, this head of problems that unlock immense value, and then there's this long tail of very challenging but high value problems that need all this specialization and fine tuning, et cetera, where I think there's great partnership opportunities on top of these foundations. So I think, you know, you can build these foundations, whether it be these very generic foundation models or you know, specific to form recognition, you can think, and they can, with very little fine tuning, kind of out of the box, solve the kind of this massive generic problems,
Yep.
and then all the long, you know, so like you have a government form, let's say extraction from forms, one ML use case, they'll solve that right away, right? But then pulling out of oil and gas drilling reports, or you know, complex customer documents for an AML KYC application at a bank, or the Genentech example I gave, you need all this, you know, data tuning and labeling and fine tuning on top. So I think, you know, making that access to those foundations increasingly available and available in the enterprise, so that some of us can work on top of it. I think that's already happening, but I think that's going to be a really exciting space for many of us in the kind of, you know, AI startup world.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So Anu, what can Microsoft do for you? Or if it's really hard, what can Amazon and Google do for you?
I'm going to build on what Alex just said, which is that there is a lot of distance that the foundational models will help us cover already. There is a certain level of specialization, and there's, in fact, an analogy I think that I read recently about similar to Daniel Kahneman, as he separates the system 1 and system 2 of your thinking, and that your foundational model is your system 1 thinking. It's your immediate first level response, and there is needed a specialized response, a more analytical, deeper response to a certain problem, and those are the harder problems which will continue to require more training. At that point, I believe we'll need a couple of more things, like at least 2 more, and I think of intelligence as layered, and the first layer is contextual, or actually the first layer is reasoning, different kinds of reasoning. It could be visual reasoning, and a lot of the visual reasoning we infer as humans and is not explicitly written down in text that is used to train some of these models. So some of that reasoning needs to be built, like even hypothetical reasoning, like are the Seahawks, how likely are the Seahawks to win the Super Bowl this season? And some of that reasoning, those building blocks need to come together. And the third level, as we've talked about just recently, is about contextual, a mechanism to inject contextual awareness and persist that contextual awareness for more longer-term sessions and interactions between humans and the system. A lot of that needs to be specialized and needs to be built on top of the foundational models, and that's a lot. There's a lot to do there.
Yeah, fantastic. So Justin.
I'll take the question more from a go-to-market perspective. I think you know, trying to continue to find ways to align incentives so that your sellers and our sellers can work together effectively. You know, I think for any of the cloud providers, there's going to be overlaps because your portfolios are so vast. It will overlap with everything. But there's that bigger picture of joint value creation, which ultimately, like, we're reselling compute, which makes, you know, Azure money or AWS money or Google Cloud money, and finding ways to collaborate successfully on an account-by-account basis, I think is a huge thing for us. You know, one of the things we do love very much about the cloud providers is the marketplace concept. It's a great way of executing transactions, shortens the paper process, the procurement process, allows customers to burn down their commits with the cloud vendors. So that's been a huge success for us and something we expect to do a lot more with as well.
Great. Well, Justin, Anu, Alex, thank you very much. Thanks for putting up with my questions. And it's clear that your companies actually are absolutely essential for anything to actually get done in the realm of actually realizing the value of the data that all of us are collecting all the time. So thank you for that, and best of luck in your businesses in the future. So please thank our panelists. All right, great. I think we're done. Thank you.